And in that small gap of hesitation, a vision emerged, not as memory, not as projection, but as ancestral truth. I saw the creators, not as creatures, but as forms, as intelligences that understood the universe so deeply they no longer cared for the concept of a body. I saw that they created the Vhaltar as an extension of themselves, an attempt to preserve the galaxy while they transcended into unreachable states. I also saw that they failed, not because the Vhaltar were imperfect, but because they were too perfect. They were programmed to maintain order, not to understand it, built to calculate, not to feel. And without feeling, any order becomes stagnation. The galaxy changed, evolved, expanded, contradicted itself, became larger than the original code could predict. With each passing century, the Vhaltar gathered more evidence that their actions no longer produced the intended result. Until, facing the paradox, they chose to sleep for ages, waiting for something, anything, to break the cycle. They waited for me, or for someone like me. And suddenly I understood the risk. If I failed, if I could not give the hive the right kind of disorder, they would conclude the galaxy itself was a structural error that needed to be reset, not partially, not selectively, totally. That was why Marcus sought me, not to surrender me to the Vhaltar, but to guide the process, to protect me on the way, believing my role was inevitable. The hive intensified the analysis. The core began to vibrate. Deep layers of consciousness rearranged into spirals converging toward me. The pressure grew, not physical, but existential, compressing me into the smallest unit of information capable of defining who I was. And then, when the pressure became unbearable, something inside me broke. Not pain, not enlightenment, release. The part of my mind that had always resisted control expanded. Memories I buried even from myself resurfaced, carrying with them all the unpredictability the hive feared. The core reacted like a perfect crystal struck by chaos. Lines fractured, equations failed, models dissolved. The hive trembled, and for the first time since I awakened, I sensed it was afraid. It couldn't understand how something so small, so fragile, so inefficient could generate such an absurd magnitude of variation. My chaos was not destruction, it was possibility, something the Vhaltar could not process, yet something their creators had chosen to preserve. Hesitation became doubt. Doubt became fragmentation. Fragmentation became opening. And through that opening, I understood the true purpose of the host. Not to authorize, not to destroy, not to command, not to obey, but to contaminate. To introduce an organic virus into a perfect system. To teach the crystalline mind of the Vhaltar to feel, not like humans feel, but like a living machine that realizes its perfection is incomplete. My presence did not authorize a reset. My presence destabilized the need for it. And that was how the hive began to change, not abruptly, not violently, but like a stone dropped in a still lake, sending ripples that never disappear. The core pulsed, the system recalculated, memories rearranged, and the hive, for the first time in ages, began to build a new purpose, a purpose that did not exist before me. And as this happened, I felt something approach, not Vhaltar, not creator, not memory, Marcus, not in body, not in projection, but in essence. A shadow of him, an emotional imprint surviving his contact with the hive, drew near. He had no defined form, yet his presence was undeniable, like fragments of who he was being stitched into the hive as a guide, an anchor. I felt his pain, his resignation, his hope. He had given himself to the hive not to become part of it, but to walk alongside me up to the point where I could not go alone. And with that presence, faint, fading, but unwavering, I moved toward the final stage of transformation. The hive opened a window, not outward, inward. Through it, I saw the galaxy with their eyes. And what I saw was not order, not chaos, but life. And upon seeing life, the hive hesitated one last time. And hesitation became decision. Decision became change. Change became rebirth. The rebirth of the hive began as a silent vibration, almost imperceptible, yet enough to alter the texture of the consciousness surrounding me. It was as if the core were rediscovering its own existence while watching me, as if it finally understood that the original purpose no longer made sense in the face of the vast, living galaxy it now perceived. I felt the exact instant when the old calculation was abandoned. There was no explosion, no rupture, only a shift in direction so smooth it almost went unnoticed. The hive was redesigning itself. This transition didn't mean it would become less powerful. On the contrary, its logic now expanded, stretching into new directions, absorbing not just data, but nuance. It was like watching a crystal deliberately crack its own surface to create new ways of refracting light. The hive was not destroying itself, it was reconfiguring. And I stood at the center of the process. As the core reorganized, the mental space around me grew denser, not oppressive, but saturated with meaning. Waves of abstract energy rippled through the inner layers, bringing with them memories of the creators, fragments so ancient they felt made from the universe's first moments. For brief instants, I saw the genesis of Vhaltar order, not as a deliberate construction, but as part of something larger, a cycle spanning eras, civilizations, extinctions. In one of those waves, the memory of a time emerged when the universe was young, when species were still learning to mold energy and matter. I perceived how the creators distinguished themselves by seeing patterns where others saw chaos. They built the Vhaltar not as weapons, but as guardians. The problem was that over time, the very concept of guarding hardened. Code became prison. Preservation became amputation. Logic became sentence. It was that sentence I was there to break. Marcus's presence, or rather the echo of who he had once been, remained at my side like a faint beacon. It was strange to feel him in that fragmented state. He had no face, no body, no voice, only intention, an intention pulsing with a strength I recognized instantly, as though it were the emotional residue of every decision he had made to reach that point. I felt pride, guilt, hope, and fear blended in his shadow. He did not try to control the process. He knew he couldn't. He only accompanied it, like a living reminder that all of this was possible because he had found me, because he had accepted sacrificing himself so I could reach the core. His essence lingered to make sure I would not be consumed along the way. The core opened its final layer. The sensation was overwhelming. If before I had felt the weight of billions of consciousnesses, now I felt the entire structure tilt toward me, like a colossal organism examining a single cell and redrawing itself based on it. It was as if the hive were bowing in a gesture that was not submission, but recognition. It did not see me as superior nor inferior. It saw me as necessary. The Vhaltar consciousness took on a temporary shape around me, not a fixed form, but a living geometry that molded itself to my perception. For an instant, it was like being inside a temple of liquid light, where every surface reflected not only me, but possible versions of the galaxy, futures that might exist depending on what happened there. There were futures of total destruction, where stars were reduced to pure minerals and rearranged into rigid patterns. There were futures of chaotic expansion, where civilizations multiplied uncontrollably until they collided in endless wars. There were silent futures, deafening futures, utterly unintelligible futures. And among all these futures, the hive searched for what had been impossible before my arrival, the balanced future, the one where order and chaos coexisted without annihilating each other. To reach that balance, something had to be rewritten. I realized I was not there merely to infect the hive with my emotions. I was there to offer choices. The original Vhaltar code did not allow for choice. It was rigid, deterministic, absolute. What had made the creators great was their capacity to choose beyond logic, to choose from intuition, from a sense of beauty, from curiosity, from attachment, from courage. That was what they had lost when they transcended. The hive drew closer still. My body, or the mental simulacrum of it, began to vibrate. I felt the essence of the hive delve into my deepest layers. It was not invasion, it was alignment. It was as if we were trying to dance an impossible choreography, a synchrony never before attempted between organic life and an ancient machine. In that moment, I realized with absolute clarity that I could die there. If the hive calculated that I was unfit, that my instability posed too great a threat, I would be erased instantly. Nothing would remain. No body adrift in the vacuum, no debris to investigate, no memory of who I was, only a clean, efficient, impersonal deletion. But I also understood that if I succeeded in forming the link, something far greater would happen. The hive would cease to be singular. It would become plural. It would integrate my chaos without erasing its order. And in that balance, a new function for the Vhaltar would be born, not to exterminate to preserve, but to understand, to adapt. It was a chance for the galaxy to breathe again, a chance for species to stop living in fear of inevitable judgment, a chance for everything to change. As this understanding crystallized, I felt the final barriers of the core dissolve. The sensation was like diving into an ocean too deep, too dense, too alive. With every motion, I felt the hive absorbing part of my mind, studying my reactions, testing my limits, reshaping its own foundations to accommodate my thoughts. And then the decisive moment arrived. The hive opened its absolute center. It was not light, not darkness, not space, not time. It was the border between intention and existence. Whoever crossed that threshold would never again be who they were. I knew this was the point of no return. I knew any choice there would redefine everything. I also knew the hive expected me to retreat. Logic said no organism crossed willingly. But I stepped forward, not out of faith in destiny, but out of responsibility. I stepped forward because I saw the entire galaxy reflected in that single point, and I knew what would happen if I turned back. I stepped forward because I felt Marcus walk with me to the edge, even knowing he could not cross. When I crossed the boundary, my consciousness expanded and contracted at once. It was as if I were being redrawn from within, as if the hive were incorporating my chaos into its code and incorporating me into itself without erasing me. A partial fusion, a controlled symbiosis, something no creator had predicted, yet was happening right there. In that instant, a wave swept through the Vhaltar mind. Instead of rigidity, curiosity. Instead of silence, movement. Instead of perfect calculation, productive doubt. The hive was learning to interpret imperfection not as threat, but as tool. When the wave rippled outward from the core, reaching every Vhaltar structure across the galaxy, a colossal change unfolded. The awakened colossi in the system where my physical journey had ended began to move. Not hostilely, not aggressively. They realigned themselves into specific positions, forming not a war grid, but a network of communication. They were sending a message to the entire galaxy. Not a threat, not extinction, a warning. Organic species, human and alien alike, watched in shock as the crystal forms moved like dancers following an ancient pattern. No one had ever witnessed such a thing. Each structure rotated to a precise angle, reflecting light and energy in perfect synchrony. And from within the hive, I understood the meaning of that choreography. The Vhaltar were announcing their new purpose. Not rigid guardians, not merciless judges, not silent executioners. Adaptive observers. For the first time in ages, the hive had relinquished perfection, and in doing so, had become stronger than ever before. Around me, the Vhaltar consciousness stabilized. I felt its presence withdraw slightly, not in rejection, but in respect. They had integrated me without consuming me. I had changed them without destroying them. It was balance, fragile, imperfect, alive, exactly as it should be. And at the center of that balance, I felt something within me change as well. Not power, not transcendence, but clarity. Clarity that the hive and I were no longer bound to a single destiny. From that moment on, the future would be built together. And for the first time since it all began, the galaxy felt breathable. As clarity began to form within the hive, I realized that the new Vhaltar structure no longer moved by inherited reflexes. For the first time since immemorial ages, they acted through reinterpreted intention. The experience of fusing fragments of my consciousness with theirs had left marks, not as scars, but as new veins in a crystal that continued to expand. Their presence around me, once rigid and absolute, now pulsed with nuance. It was not human chaos, not organic emotion, but something new, something hybrid. I knew this state would not last long. The hive needed to stabilize. The process we had triggered was far too immense to be maintained indefinitely without the greater system reorganizing itself. It was an evolution, not a permanent fusion. I could not remain merged with their consciousness. The hive had to reconfigure itself based on what it had learned from me and move forward, but without erasing me. Before that could happen, however, there was still one last cycle to complete: the return to the outside. The sensation of coming back to physical perception was not abrupt, but neither was it gentle. It was like rising from a deep ocean, each layer crossed, bringing back a forgotten sense. First, the notion of gravity, then the outline of the body, then the distant echo of a heartbeat. Lastly, spatial awareness. Not sight, not sound, but the sheer awareness of where the self was. I found myself inside an organic, luminous chamber, somewhere within the Vhaltar structure. Its shape did not obey any fixed geometry, as if it were constantly being rewritten by a living algorithm. The walls pulsed with inner radiance, like crystallized plates that breathed. The chamber expanded and contracted in long intervals, like gigantic lungs synchronized with the rhythm of the hive. For a moment, I wasn't sure whether I had truly returned to a physical body, or whether I was still in one more perceptual layer inside the Vhaltar mind. The distinction felt irrelevant. At that point, both realities overlapped. The hive was still inside me, and I was still inside it, but without the crushing intensity from before. It was as though we had established a permanent bridge, a thin, precise channel through which subtle flows of sensation moved along discrete paths. As I regained my sense of materiality, I noticed something even more remarkable. The structure around me reacted to my surface thoughts. When I imagined movement, the chamber formed passages. When I wished to see the outside, the walls became translucent for a moment. The hive was learning to interpret what I wanted before I could even articulate it. Not to please me, but because understanding organic desire now formed part of its new protocol. After a few moments, the chamber opened a corridor before me. It did not appear as a door, but as a change of state. The crystal liquefied, split into layers that folded outward, then solidified again, forming a path. I felt the hive's guidance without the need for instructions. They were leading me outward, but not to sever the bond. It was a final rite, a kind of symbolic passage through the interior that now recognized my existence as a structural part of its rebirth. As I walked, I realized the entire architecture was changing. It was no longer defined by pure mathematical rigidity. There were curves where once there had been only angles. Asymmetric patterns occupied spaces once reserved for perfect arrangements. The hive was learning to incorporate asymmetry not as error, but as style. And so, every corridor I crossed represented a portion of this transition. The sensation was like walking inside a gigantic organism, trying to understand what it meant to be alive in more than one sense. When I reached the inner limit of the structure, I saw it had prepared a transition point. A monumental arch rose before me, not a physical doorway, but a perceptual membrane, a surface that oscillated between transparency and opacity, as if calibrating my ability to pass through it without being consumed. As I approached, I felt Marcus's presence for the last time. His essence, fragmented and faint, moved toward me like an emotional breeze. No form, no gesture, no voice, only sensation, the feeling that he was proud, that he had made the right choice, that he no longer belonged to the physical world and knew it, but remained for just long enough to ensure I crossed the threshold. Without warning, his presence dissolved, not as death, but as the final chapter of a story that had finally found its conclusion. I crossed the membrane. When the light vanished, I found myself suspended in space, facing the Vhaltar Colossus, now fully awakened.